Chargers reveal a plan for a financial marriage with a hated rival and a fabulous new stadium in the L.A. suburb of Carson. This bolt from the blue blindsides Mayor Faulkner and his San Diego Stadium Task Force. And tenants fight back against a problem landlord as city inspectors fall down on the job. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our KPBS Metro reporter, Taryn Mento. Hi, Taryn. Good to see you.
Hi, Mark.
Tony Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times. Good to have you back, Tony.
Good to be here.
And KPBS Speaks City Heights reporter, Megan Burks. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Mark.
Well, the announcement was truly a bolt from the blue. The Chargers proposed to snuggle up with the hated Raiders in a sparkling new stadium in L.A. This caught Mayor Kevin Faulkner and his stadium task force completely off guard. Not that things were going well between Chargers ownership and the mayor and his group to begin with. This story breaks neatly into two parts: the effort to come up with a plan to keep the Chargers in San Diego, and now the Chargers' bold proposal to possibly move to L.A. and join the Raiders. Taryn, let's start with that first side on the task force. The Chargers really weren't keen on playing ball with the mayor and his task force to begin with, were they?
Right. No, I mean, even before he announced who was on it, when he announced the idea of it, they came out strong and kind of said, you know, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. We've been here before. We've done this before. And there was some debate over what kind of role Steve Cushman from the Convention Center Corporation would play in this. They were upset about that because they claim that he's spiked this idea of a joint proposal stadium convention center expansion downtown. So right from the get-go, even before they knew who was on it, they weren't pleased.
They weren't happy with this whole idea about it. And remind us generally, what's the nature of the folks who are on this task force? Right.
You've got some people from someone from the Chamber of Commerce. You've got a former NFL executive and former Chargers executive, actually, Jim Steig on there. You've got some developers, some investors. So it's a broad range. I think 9 people in total.
Okay. And their idea, the Mayor Faulkner had tasked them, you want to come up with a plan. We're going to have something specific, a yes, no, up, down vote here that we've really never had in all these years.
Right. He gave them 2 options. You know, look at building a new facility at the current location in Mission Valley, or looking into this joint use idea in downtown San Diego with the convention center, whatever role that would play. And the other thing was come up with a financing plan, a way to actually make this work, to be paid for. And he gave him a deadline he said by fall, so somewhat of a deadline.
And how much? What's the ballpark figure, so to speak, on the cost of this stadium here?
Right. I mean, Chairman of the task force, Adam Day, said Mark Fabiani with the Chargers had thrown out the estimate of $1.2 billion to $1.5 billion. With the announcement of the proposal with the Chargers and Raiders, they're saying that their stadium could cost $1.7 billion. So, I mean, that 1.2 to 1.7.
What's a few $100 million,
right,
among friends? And we're going to get to that point in a minute about the cost up there and the financing. We're going to delve into that. But I want to stay on this topic with this task force here to begin with. And the Chargers and various politicians, they've been floating this for, 13 years now.
Going on
14 years. So why has there never been a specific plan to vote on before? Were the votes just never there and doesn't look like they are now?
I think really that's kind of the big question here. I mean, the Chargers have said they've put forth 9 proposals. I think the idea is that it's going to require a large investment of public dollars, hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions. Yeah.
Right. And there's, the 2/3 voter threshold that they would need to hit in order to have that go through. And there's questions of, well, that's just not going to happen. That's kind of a high mark to really hit. Right. So, I mean, and if Tony wants to jump in, so that's really kind of slowed down the possibility of this really moving forward.
Right. Do we ever get a vote here, Tony, at that threshold?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Vote, obviously.
No, nationwide, very few times. Look at San Francisco. They said no, and their team moved down to Santa Clara, which isn't as far as Carson is from San Diego, but it's a fur piece. Well, we tend to forget, maybe because the Chargers want us to forget what the last decade has been like financially, with the pension scandal, with the recession, and then, of course, with our basic pinch penny attitude towards funding government. Don't forget we had a 0.5-cent sales tax on the ballot in 2010, got overwhelmingly defeated. And as we speak here today, I believe no service in the city of San Diego is funded at a level that exceeds that of 7 or 8 years ago. In other words, everything is a little less than it was because of what it's been like. just about the worst time to go ask voters in San Diego to pony up for a sports stadium. And the no money for billionaires mantra is very strong here. Don't forget, with Petco, which was approved by 60%, it was a different funding scheme, and actually that vote was advisory, didn't even need the vote, but they had it. Wouldn't have passed the 2/3.
That came 2 weeks after they'd had this wonderful run and appearance in the World Series against the Yankees.
That did help, and we had Tony Gwynn and Ted Williams, about as heroic sports figures as we've ever had.
Right.
And John Moores, the owner of the Padres, had a good reputation. None of those factors currently exist. Mm-hmm. And again, the mantra, no public money, is very strong. And then you have the Chargers proposing an idea that runs into a brick wall called the convention center, and the hotel industry and the city council, all of whom say if we're going to expand the convention center, it has to be contiguous. Mm-hmm. Chargers have suggested a joint stadium convention annex several blocks away. Mm-hmm. Not good enough, they say, the council and the convention center hotel industry. So a series of very tall mountains have to be climbed, and I think very quickly.
Yeah. Now, Taryn, I wanted to get back while we're still on this Stadium Task Force segment here. Mark Fabiani, the spokesman for the Chargers here, he really wasn't keen on this at all, as we've been saying. He listed these principles that would have to be abided by, if that's the right way to put it, by this task force. What were the high points of those principles?
Right. He gave the task force a little bit of advice, to put it. He said, he did ask the task force, don't bend to political pressure. Don't present a plan just because you're essentially being asked to present a plan. Present one that will work and that's good. And he did mention specifically, and present one that will be good enough to get that 2/3 voter approval. So he asked for kind of a lot to focus on, do something that will work.
Political cover is, I think, the phrase he used.
And he noted that they ginned up a plan to expand the convention center that didn't require 2/3, didn't require going to the public, and it got shot down by the courts. Mm-hmm. So essentially he said, you've tried this before to get around that 2/3.
Don't want to see a replay of that, yeah.
Also, essentially, Fabiani, on behalf of his client, Dean Spanos, was saying, we suspect that what you're really up to, you're going to put a plan up that the politicians, including the mayor, will say, okay, vote on it, and it'll get voted down, and then the politicians will say, we tried, so they don't suffer any damage, and the team loses. Right. But don't forget that in November 2016, Kevin Faulconer will probably be on the ballot for re-election. So he's got a lot of skin in this game.
He's got a big stake in this.
So Fabiani sort of called them out and said, you're on the verge of putting something up that you're not going to put any force behind, and it's going to lose. We're not going to help you run cover for politicians. Tough stuff.
Let's shift gear now to this proposal. It was unveiled today up in the city of Carson, which is an L.A. suburb. Tell us about where that is exactly. It's near the 405. Not that long a shot if you want to drive up, Charger fans. And what's it going to cost? Tell us about this stadium.
In the range of $2 billion, once all is said and done. Carson, as one of the morning anchors said this morning, is 101 miles from San Diego. So we've already put the tape measure. Long way to drive. It's not in the city of Los Angeles, but it's in the county. And it had been eyed for a number of years by people who'd really like to bring an NFL team back to Los Angeles. And this property is sitting there. And apparently the Raiders and the Chargers got together, bought it
some time ago, and kept it real quiet.
Some time ago, got themselves an architect and financing system, dealt with the powers that are in Carson, all the while saying, in San Diego at least, we're willing to talk to you San Diegans about staying here. That caused a lot of agitation. The mayor was very upset, as he doesn't get terribly emotive, but he was upset that he had to learn this from, my goodness, a newspaper reporter. And so they kept it quiet.
That's so interesting. We were talking to Taryn earlier about Jim Steig being a former CEO of the Chargers, a top administrator with the NFL. You'd think he'd be connected, but Tony says this has been going on months, and they kept it quiet.
It is unclear to me, though, how much the NFL knew. I know that if you look in today's story by Sam Farmer, our NFL writer, there isn't a lot from the league. It's almost as if they really didn't know all the details of it.
Fabiani says that he's been keeping the team's been keeping the NFL up to date on their developments on this. I mean, he said to me that they were interviewing architects in January. The land deal kind of just went through, but I mean, there's a lot of you're going to have to lay down.
They have no idea about this. It's just kind of amazing you can keep all this quiet.
I think it was,
Megan?
I'm just curious how serious you guys think they are about this. Is this really viable, or it feels a little bit like playground drama, like your first ex with his new beau kind of being like, I want to make sure you see me.
And negotiating floor.
That's one way to put it.
Because people have been using a marital metaphor here. When Fabiani talked to the advisory committee, was that a divorce paper?
Right.
Or was that the opening salvo of a lawyer starting negotiations over a prenup between, I don't know, Kim and Kanye or something?
Yeah.
I don't know. And
now we're snuggling up with the Raiders of all
And
people.
now there's talk that we're still in marital counseling, but one partner seems to want to leave.
Right.
Maybe the other one should consider dating.
The Raiders.
It looks serious. It looks like there are serious men with serious money behind them. Carson certainly wants it, and they'll grease the skids, zoning, and that kind of thing. They don't have any plans, they say, to ask for tax money. Wow.
But the teams in their announcement today said that they will be going by the NFL guidelines. The owners are the ones who will have the final say on this. So you would think the NFL has thrown the holy water on this to get to this point even. We've bought the land, you've made the announcement.
Yeah, I think now that we know what's going on, we can see what Fabiani did with the advisory committee. He was laying the predicate for the idea that they will someday have to go to the NFL and say, we tried to work with these people for 14 years, $15 million, and it just didn't work. So that makes sense now why he did what he did, both in tone and texture, that someday they will have to prove to the NFL that it just didn't work in San Diego. Now, maybe that's where Jim Steig, former NFL official, former Chargers official, and now a member of the advisory committee, maybe that's where he goes in. Maybe he goes in and says, NFL committee, made up of all these rich owners, hey, they really didn't, and we really have our act together at long last in San Diego. Don't approve the move.
So he might be a key member of this task force. Megan, we're going to get in a moment here to the financing of this thing in L.A. and this big price tag here, but you cover an area of San Diego that's a working class. It's a tough area. A lot of folks are just struggling day to day to get by. Do they even dream of buying a ticket at today's prices to go to a football game or take a family there? I mean,
I haven't asked him about it, and I think the fact that I'm a lifelong San Diegan and haven't thought to ask anybody about the the Chargers, kind of tells you
there may be a whole lot of folks
a lot
like
of
you
lifelong
out there,
San Diegans feel
pull
about
up the moving van folks, and we wish you well.
I don't think we should underestimate how profitable the National Football League is on any given week during the season, like the top 6-8 TV shows on television are NFL games. The NFL is a television sport. It doesn't make its money off
and
people
the owners
going.
with the salary cap all make a fortune before they sell one ticket or one license to a
Now,
seat.
the argument is that when they go to L.A., they have enough high rollers that'll pay, you pick it, $20,000 for the right.
Yeah, let's talk about
to
that.
buy
That's a personal seat license.
to buy a season ticket. Right. Now, the 49ers, when they moved down that freeway from San Francisco to Santa Clara, they found those people. Well, that's Silicon Valley. That's the Bay Area.
One of the richest areas in America.
Lots of people with lots of money. Right. San Diego is not quite like that. Well, in fact, isn't like that at all.
Carson may not be, but there's other areas in
Carson isn't for sure, but all of Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, you name it. There are, they say, they've done the number crunching, and they say that's what makes them able, the Chargers and the Raiders, to build a stadium there without going into the public trough.
Yeah, now that's amazing. I want to ask about that. So we talked about maybe, let's pick a figure, $500 million more for a stadium up there, which I don't understand. It's one stadium, like one stadium here would be. All right, $500 million more. But they don't need this hundreds of millions in public financing. How do they do it?
Well, that's one of the many questions. As I understand, this press conference that was held in Carson Friday morning was long on rah-rah but short on details. So the devil,
yes, it was.
Lots of devils are in those details. Now, will we know those details? I suppose somebody will in Carson.
At some point it'll come
On the other hand, Carson itself doesn't seem to be having to invest much other than just standing there and
come let us adore you.
Wear either a Charger or a Raider jersey. So maybe this will be less public than it would be if it was here, and maybe there won't be any litigation. As we know, there would be litigation here if San Diego went to build a stadium. 16 lawsuits. You may remember against Petco Park. All of them defeated, but it slowed things down.
And this does give the Chargers and the Raiders up in Oakland leverage now to try and work out a deal.
I mean, the mayor said Friday morning, he was stunned Thursday night. By Friday morning, he had gotten his act together a little more, and he said, we're going to speed up our process down here. Not going to wait maybe until fall.
Right.
I want it sooner.
Get it going.
Maybe, and then there's talk of a special election, not waiting until November of 2016. So if we were in the 2-minute drill on this, we're now in about the half-a-minute drill. Unfortunately, San Diego appears to be several touchdowns behind.
All right, well, in our half-a-minute drill, I want to bring up one other point here. Your paper did a profile of Stan Kroenke, the billionaire owner of the St. Louis Rams. Of course, the Rams were in L.A., went to St. Louis. He's talking about another stadium just 10 miles away from this one that we're talking about in Carson.
And that's why the Chargers and Raiders, particularly the Chargers, they don't want to be shut out of that big
lose their leverage
market.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they see Kroenke, who's a bit of a idiosyncratic individual. When he wants to do something, he does it. He's not been talking to St. Louis until just recently, so he's kind of stiff-arming them. He wants to build at Inglewood, move in, and maybe rent that stadium also to another team. So the Chargers looked up there and said, hey, we could be shut out of this thing. We better move. The Raiders, never been happy apparently back in Oakland financially.
See a way to piggyback and maybe make something work.
So the two of these rivals, and anyone who's been to a Charger Raider games knows what a rival
don't get near the drunk tank.
Exactly. They made common cause.
Well, as we've said, we got a lot of questions left and a lot of reporting to do. It's going to be fascinating as we move forward, and I know we'll be talking more about this on this show. We're going to move on now. Water leaks, broken windows, chronic mold, infestations of cockroaches and rats are common features in scores of San Diego properties owned or operated by a man named Bakim Shah. Tenant complaints to city code compliance officers have been legion, but little has been done. And Megan, your story this week is a study in frustration for these folks living in these apartments, and it's gone on a long time.
Right. So I requested all of the code compliance complaints from 2013 in the City Heights area early last year. And when I finally got all of those, I started coding it, putting it in a spreadsheet, and this man's name rose to the top as having multiple violations. I looked up all of his properties through the county assessor's office, and I found that he had 62 complaints against him since 2001, and about 30% of those were for substandard conditions. So things like the mold, the roaches, the things that could be hazardous to your health.
Well, so he is certainly on the radar of the folks down at Code Compliance, and we're going to get more into that in a moment. But you started your story with tenant Katrina Villanueva tells us and what the living conditions were like in her apartment. We got a bite from that.
He was like, whoa, don't even take a shower here. And he's like, can you keep your door closed like all the time so it won't go like to your kids? But he just took pictures and he's like, oh, I can't help you on this. He just told me to look it up in the internet.
So he just told you to Google?
Yeah.
If you didn't catch that, Villanueva says the inspector told her to Google mold. That's the other thing Shaw's tenants have in common, little recourse.
All right, that's from your feature, of course, this week on this. So that's it, Google mold. I mean, that's your best shot here from the city.
Yeah, so Karina called in a city inspector after having already requested that the repairs be made for several years. She made verbal requests, she made written requests, still nothing fixed, and so she called in an inspector. And it is true that there's no laws saying how much mold is illegal or what kind of mold is illegal. But you get into an apartment, you see a blanket of mold, you know it's not good, and the state has been advising code compliance officers to figure out what is the cause of that mold and go after that.
Okay, so obviously the water leaks or what have you.
Right.
Things going on the walls, who knows?
And your story pointed out that they're not funded sufficiently, that code compliance is not where it should be, just can't handle all of the complaints from a city this size. And it just strikes me, that's the classic San Diego story. That's what you get when you run a pinch penny government. We had a half-cent sales tax in 2010. Boy, shot that thing down. A councilman named Kevin Faulkner, now the mayor, was the leader Didn't think we needed that half-cent sales tax, certainly not until we clean up that pension problem. And now we find that code compliance, like a lot of city departments, just doesn't have enough people. What are we going to do?
Terrence?
What's the mayor going to do?
Well, I was going to say, actually, the mayor was just on KPBS Midday talking about this and actually he said what he was going to do.
Yeah,
he was a little more definite about this than the Chargers, wasn't he?
He was. He was pretty fired up. He said that it was unacceptable, that we shouldn't tolerate anybody who's treating their tenants this way, and he said that he is indeed going to fund code compliance better this year.
And I think we do have a bite here. Let's hear what the mayor says.
And not only is, I think, is an issue of code enforcement, making sure that they're out there and with enough code enforcement officers, but I think this story really strikes to the heart of what's the strategy and how we're going after particularly individuals that seem to have problem properties. It's not just one-offs. We need to target some of those individuals and send a very clear, compelling message. That type of living condition will never be tolerated in the city, and I'm looking forward to taking strong action on that.
And will you be talking to the city attorney's office about that? Because I understand it falls under their jurisdiction.
We're talking with our city attorney's office. I'll be talking with code enforcement, make sure we have the resources that we need, but have them hear very clearly from myself as mayor, we're going to go after conditions like that. It should never exist in any city in the country.
All right, I'll bite. What does the city attorney say about this? You contacted them, of course, in the story.
So there is kind of a chain of command. So code compliance is the enforcement arm. So they're the guys out on the street who have to write up the violations, collect the evidence, and then
they're the cop on the beat. Yeah.
Right, and then they bring that to the city attorney's office. And based on the evidence, the city attorney can file criminal charges, they can file civil charges, or they can actually seize the property if they can't get this person to comply.
So they have a pretty good hammer to work with.
Yeah, they've told me that they have used that hammer in several instances where the cases are particularly egregious. No hot water, no plumbing, but those are staying out of the headlines, and a lot of times they're settled out of court.
Now, Mr. Shaw, you of course attempted to interview him about this several times, right? He didn't really give you a reasonable interview on this. You talked to him briefly. Huh?
Yeah, I was able to reach him on the phone, and he was friendly and forthcoming, and he said that he tries to make all of the repairs, but it's up to the tenant to call him and ask for them. Otherwise, he doesn't know. He offered to show me proof, but then he kind of fell off the face of the earth, and I kept trying to contact him to get that proof and to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he just never called back.
Mm-hmm. Any advocates pushing on behalf of these tenants, legal aid, ACLU, etc.? Or are they pretty much on their own? Are they the folks without recourse to much assistance?
There are a couple of organizations. The tenants I spoke with said that they went through several tenants' rights attorneys. They went through the Legal Aid Society, didn't really get much help until they found this attorney, Mark Whittam, and Dan Lickel. And so these attorneys are working with them. And there are some organizations in City Heights, but for the most part, I mean, people are kind of dealing with this on their own because they can't afford to move anywhere, so they're not speaking up for the most part, and when they are speaking up, it's hard to find the right inroad to get the changes made.
I presume some of these folks might be on Section 8 housing subsidy, or rent subsidies.
That's a federal subsidy.
Federal subsidy. Wouldn't those folks have a responsibility for subsidizing
keeping proper standards, living conditions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In other words, they're throwing money at a owner who doesn't treat his people well.
You're teasing some stuff that's coming out Monday.
Shame on me.
Thanks,
Tony.
Tony.
That was beautiful. That was a nice segue for us. Let me ask you about Mr. Shaw again. Has the city ever made a case against him?
They have. They've taken him to task for substandard conditions, but it was one of those out of court, not much, money or fees paid or anything like that. The only time he has appeared in court against the city is for renting to a medical marijuana dispensary.
All right, so we're concerned about the pot dispensaries a little more than some of these conditions here. Now, Tony was mentioning advocates and all. Councilman David Alvarez has waded into this. The constituent is of his that you had interviewed. What's he trying to do?
Yeah, he told me he's heard about this for quite a while and has been kind of trying to get some buy-in. And his idea is to, first of all, fund code compliance at the appropriate level so that it can be proactive. He also wants the city to use the full hammer of the law that it can, which is this receivership program where you can either seize property or you can put a lien on it, requiring that landlord or the person who buys the property after to fix it. But that lien says, at some point this will get fixed.
Slap a lien on it. Now, what typically happens to these tenants in the end? The problem kind of moves on, doesn't it? And the next guy comes in and he or she is stuck with it.
Right. I heard time and time again, people just move. They just get tired, they get exhausted, and they just move. Yes. And one of the tenants who I spoke with ended up getting into an affordable housing development, but those we know we don't have enough of those in the city. And another tenant also just recently moved who I spoke with.
Okay, and that's obviously not a solution to the problem. Okay, we got a couple of seconds left, but you do have another story, a follow-up coming on Monday about this.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll have a lot coming next week.
Well, very good. Well, we'll look forward to that. If you haven't seen Megan's story, take a look at it here. And that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable, and I'd like to thank my guests, Taryn Mento of KPBS News, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Megan Burks of KPBS News. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.